The Battle of the Five Armies, the final chapter of The Hobbit you've been waiting for, is the only battle that will make any man's blood boil. When this epic battle was brought to the screen, it shocked the world. Today I'm going to tell you more about the final chapter of Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies. And the war began with this evil dragon Smaug. When the long-sleeping Smaug was awakened by the Dwarven raiders, it burst out of the Dwarven fortress, broke through the door and flew out, leaping up and spinning around to remove all the plating from its body and turn all its indignation towards Esgaroth. This is where the story of the Battle of the Five Armies begins. A devastating catastrophe befalls the humans, as Smaug unleashes his fiery dragonfire and the terrified people scatter in a fight for survival. In an instant, Esgaroth is engulfed in flames, becoming a living hell. The inept master of the town abandons the residents, sailing away on a boat loaded with gold. Showing no concern for their safety, the cries of anguish echo throughout the town. Not far away, on the lonely mountain, the remorseful dwarves can only watch from a distance, realizing it was their actions that angered Smaug. Only Thorin remains, deep in thought, gazing at the castle gate. But at this critical moment, one person goes against the tide. He picks up his bow and climbs onto the roof. With the distant clock tower as his destination, Bard challenges the might of the dragon to fulfill his ancestors' unfinished mission, drawing Smaug's attention as he runs towards the clock tower. He nearly loses his life before reaching the tower. While the dragon continues to unleash flames upon the town, Bard reaches the clock tower in the shortest time possible. With the tolling of the bell, it is the moment for him to defend his ancestors' honor. As Smaug approaches slowly, Bard takes precise aim and shoots the first arrow at the dragon. Although it hits Smaug's body, it bounces off his sturdy scales. Despite the slim hope, Bard does not give up. After cutting the alarm bell's rope, Bard once again took his bow and arrow and shot at Smaug. Still full of expectation but with the same result, the men on the run seemed to see a glimmer of hope again when they saw Bard fighting the dragon. In the midst of their conversation, Bard's son suddenly remembers the words his father once told him. There is a black arrow forged by the dwarves hidden beneath the statue. He decides to give up his chance to escape and, despite the others' dissuasion, swiftly makes his way to the statue using a grappling hook. He wants to be as brave as his father in facing the dragon. Bard shoots more than a dozen arrows at Smaug until only one remains, but he clings to the last shred of hope. He readjusts his position, takes aim again at Smaug, and releases the arrow, but this time, he provokes Smaug, who retaliates against him. Just when Bard is on the verge of despair, his son arrives at the clock tower, holding the black arrow in his hands. This is the only arrow capable of harming Smaug. Bard is deeply concerned for his son's safety and urges him to leave quickly. In this moment of solace between father and son, the dragon strikes again, destroying the clock tower. Bard's son hangs in midair, his life hanging by a thread. In a state of extreme panic, Bard urgently pulls his son to safety. Meanwhile, Smaug lands in the center of the town. With renewed hope, Bard takes the black arrow from his son's hand and gazes at the dragon with anger.
Who are you that would stand against me?
Just as Bard prepares to shoot his bow, he realizes that it has been broken in half. Smaug, with his keen vision, witnesses this scene. The arrogant dragon begins to mock Bard, even displaying a sense of enjoyment upon seeing the despair of the human. After taunting Bard, Smaug turns his attention to Bard's son, approaching them slowly. This crosses Bard's final line of tolerance. Bard places the broken bow on two wooden frames. With unwavering determination, Bard shoulders the weight of his ancestors' legacy. Taking aim, he placed the black arrow on his son's shoulder, and despite his son shaking with fear, he held back his tears. Just when Smaug turned around, it exposed the scars of the year. It turns out Bard's ancestors did manage to hit Smaug. Surprised, Bard's confidence soars, and a faint smile appears on his face. Smaug slowly walks in with his mouth wide open and Bard is pulling his bowstring hard in preparation. Bard is surprisingly calm at the moment. At the moment when Smaug is about to unleash its flames, Bard roars in anger and releases the arrow, hitting Smaug with precision. Smaug lets out a cry of pain and crashes into the clock tower. Father and son plunge into the water, narrowly escaping. The dragon rides in the houses before flying into the air and unleashing its final roar. The last dragon of Middle-earth had finally fallen. On its descent, Smaug coincidentally crashed into the fleeing mayor of Esgaroth's ship. This is what happens to evil.
Smaug is dead.
My beard, I think he's right. Look there!
Esgaroth has turned into ruins, and the most urgent task now is to find a new refuge. Bard's heroic act earns him the admiration of the people, and he becomes their new leader. Bard suggests that everyone relocate to the abandoned river town nearby and establish a temporary settlement there. At the same time, the 4 dwarves who had remained in Escalo were to return to the Lonely Mountain and join Thorin. Before setting off, Keely expressed his love to the elf Toriel. They are interrupted by Legolas, who is consumed by jealousy and demands that the dwarves leave immediately. Keely gives Toriel a token of their love before leaving. On the other side, Azog and his orc army march toward the Lonely Mountain. A battle that will shock Middle-earth is about to begin. Meanwhile, inside the Great Hall of the Lonely Mountain, Prince Thorin, overwhelmed by the Mountain of Gold, becomes consumed by greed. He commands everyone to search the gold pile for the Arkenstone. Arkenstone, the symbol of Turin's royal power, which, if possessed, would rule Middle-earth all the dwarves. Only Bilbo did not participate in the search because he discovered that Thorin had confirmed what Smaug had said before: Arkenstone would only corrupt his mind and potentially drive him mad. In truth, Bilbo has been carrying the Arkenstone all along in his possession. Bilbo has come to consider Thorin as his friend. Out of concern for him, Bilbo decides not to give the Arkenstone to Thorin temporarily. The people of Esgaroth have just suffered a catastrophic disaster, losing their homes. They are searching for their missing loved ones amidst the ruins. The most urgent task now is to find a new refuge. Under Bard's leadership, they have settled in the abandoned river town. Bard remembers Thorin's promise to help them and plans to negotiate with him at the Lonely Mountain, urging him to fulfill his promise and share a portion of the treasure for the reconstruction of their homeland. Thorin, however, has guessed that the people of Esgaroth would come seeking him. He orders his companions to build makeshift walls overnight to block the gates of the Lonely Mountain. Keely deeply sympathizes with the residents of Esgaroth. He doesn't understand why, after they helped them, the people lost everything, and now they are being turned away. Thorin acknowledges the hardship they have endured under Smaug's devastation but considers their survival a stroke of luck. The current dwarf king lacks integrity. Thorin doesn't want to share even a single coin with others. The next day, Bard prepares to negotiate with Thorin at the Lonely Mountain, but he is shocked by what he sees before leaving. The entire river town is now filled with a host of armored elven soldiers. Thranduil, riding on an elk, leads his army here, providing essential supplies to the town's inhabitants in their time of need. Bard, representing the people of the town, expresses heartfelt gratitude. Thranduil says he is not here for them. He is taking his legion to the Lonely Mountain to retrieve what was his own. The pure white gemstone he entrusted to Thorin's grandfather for modification has been unjustly claimed by the dwarves through various excuses. It was more precious to Thranduil than the Arkenstone, but in Thorin's eyes it was worthless. Thranduil is willing to go to war with the dwarves over this jewel because he knows their stubbornness. He understands that reasoning with them will not result in the return of the gemstone. Bard expresses that the residents of Esgaroth should also have a share of the treasure inside the Lonely Mountain. In order to avoid the impending war, he wants to attempt a sincere negotiation with the dwarves. At this moment, Thorin also notices that Rivertown is now filled with elven soldiers. Meanwhile, Bard arrives at the base of the city walls, and they begin their conversation through a small hole in the wall. Bard demands that Thorin fulfill his promise to allow the suffering people of Esgaroth to rebuild their homes. With an arrogant gaze, Thorin questions whether Bard is threatening them with the elven army. What's more, Thorin knew that he was only helping them for a big payday. Today, Thorin, with the lure of wealth, promises are worthless to him. Bard warns him that if they don't reach an agreement, the elven army will march upon the Lonely Mountain. However, Thorin's pride prevents him from backing down, and he is ready to face war to protect the treasure. As Thranduil predicted, negotiating with the dwarves is a futile endeavor. Filled with frustration, Bard angrily leaves the Lonely Mountain on his white horse. Thorin's attitude shocks his companions. The other dwarves remain loyal to Thorin and dare not speak out, except for Bilbo, who can't help but criticize Thorin for his actions. The treasure inside the Lonely Mountain is amassed like a mountain, and even if a small portion were given to the people of Esgaroth, it would be a minor loss. Moreover, they helped them in the past, so how can their group of 13 stand against the elven army of 100,000? Thorin laughs and tells Bilbo to never underestimate the dwarves. Bard hastily returns to Rivertown to inform Thranduil of the situation. Even without being told, Thranduil already guessed the outcome. Reasoning with Thorin is a wasted effort. Only the use of force will bring a resolution. Meanwhile, the dwarves push a statue off the city walls, breaking the bridge. The people of Esgaroth, along with the elven army, Start preparing for battle. The dwarves arm themselves fully, making thorough preparations for the war to come. Thorin specifically presents Bilbo with a precious gift as a symbol of their friendship. It is a vest made of mithril, crafted by his ancestors, which renders the wearer invulnerable to weapons. Unbeknownst to them, another force is quietly arranging to take advantage before the war breaks out. Azog's son stands on a rock, commanding an army of 100,000 Orcish soldiers, rushing through the night towards the lonely mountain. At this moment, the war that will shake Middle-earth officially begins. Thranduil, king of the elves, joined forces with the human army and led 100,000 soldiers to the dwarven walls. In response to the dwarves' provocation, Thranduil merely smiled and made a gesture. Faced with the elves' 100,000 golden armor, the dwarves' expressions changed dramatically. Thranduil revealed to Thorin that he possessed something Thorin desired. From his pocket, Thranduil produced a dazzling gem. It was the Arkenstone, the prized possession of the Dwarven Kingdom and a symbol of the power of the Dwarven royal lineage. It turned out that Bilbo had left the lonely mountain by sneaking down the wall before the battle, and Bilbo took Arkenstone to Thranduil's tent. Bilbo handed over the gem to the Elven King, hoping that the Arkenstone could be used to prevent the impending war. He believed that only with the Arkenstone could Thorin fulfill his promise. Bilbo deeply cared about the friendship between the dwarves and himself and didn't want to see them perish on the battlefield. Gandalf urged Bilbo to leave before daybreak, fearing the consequences if Thorin discovered his actions. Thorin reluctant to admit that it is Arkenstone.
The Arkenstone is in this mountain! It is a trick!
It's no trick. The stone is real.
However, Bilbo chose not to run away and bravely returned to Thorin, confessing everything. The sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. Thorin berated Bilbo for his betrayal and questioned why he would turn against him. Bilbo stated that the Thorin he knew never broke his word and never doubted the loyalty of his kin. This enraged Thorin further. Thorin ordered the other dwarves to throw Bilbo off the city walls, but none of them were willing to do so. Bilbo had stood by them in times of hardship and was considered a comrade. An angered Thorin personally held Bilbo against the wall.
You don't like my burglar! Then please, don't damage him. Return him to me.
Gandalf chided Thorin for not projecting the good image of a king. This statement awakened Thorin, but he had already lost trust in anyone and was unwilling to engage in any dealings with the folk of the Shire. Bard, on the other hand, asked Thorin if he would trade his promise for the Arkenstone. Thorin found himself helpless at this moment. He couldn't understand why he should pay to regain what was rightfully his. Facing the 100,000-strong army beneath the city walls, Thorin realized he had no chance of winning. Even the other dwarves believed they might not see the sun rise again.
Will you have peace or war?
Just when Thorin was at a loss, a raven flew to the city walls. The sound of footsteps on a distant hillside as a large group of dwarves, the legions, are slowly approaching. It was none other than the renowned Iron Hills army led by Thorin's cousin, Dane. Dwarves on the ramparts instantly imposing. Thranduil immediately ordered a change in tactics and prepared to face the Iron Hills army himself. The one riding the pig is none other than Dane, Thorin's cousin. His temper is even wilder than Thorin's, and he has no interest in discussing any profound truths with anyone. He simply issues harsh words and starts a war directly. Thranduil ordered the humans to step back and personally face the Iron Hills army. Dane leads the way with sheep cavalry. A large number of sheep cavalry swarm out of the infantry ranks. Thranduil ordered his archers to be ready. Battle between dwarves and elves begins. Under Thranduil's command, 100,000 arrows poured down like a torrential rain, assailing the Iron Hills army. However, the dwarves swiftly intercepted the arrows with their rotating weapons, capturing the front lines of the elven soldiers. Thranduil unleashed another volley of arrows, but the dwarves once again intercepted them. The sheep riders had already broken through the elven ranks, and both sides engaged in close combat. The elves immediately switched formations to melee mode, quickly grab a shield to cushion the impact of the cavalry. The sheep riders broke through the elven lines, and the battle descended into chaos. Just as the two sides were locked in fierce combat, a sudden and violent tremor echoed from the distant hillside. Startled, both armies ceased fighting. Enormous sandworms burst out of the ground, but instead of attacking them, the creatures were carving a path for another force, Azog the Destroyer. appeared on Ravenhill, commanding his troops and assessing the situation. Azog prepared to wipe out humans, dwarves and elves. With the sound of resounding horns, countless orc legions poured out from newly dug tunnels. Although Dane did not like elves, he understood that the real enemy was the orcs. Dane immediately ordered a change in tactics, but the elven army remained stationary, observing the unfolding events. In terms of numbers, the combined forces of elves and dwarves were not as numerous as the orcs. The dwarves on the city walls were eager to join the fight, but Thorin prohibited them, ordering them to stay in place. Bilbo couldn't understand why the elves stood still. The intrepid dwarves quickly built a shield wall in no time at all. Spears emerged from the shield wall, ready for combat. Just as the two armies were about to clash head-on, the elven forces suddenly leaped forward from above the dwarves, leading the vanguard charge. Thranduil understands that this war is the War of Middle-earth. The dwarves and elves had united as allies to confront the orc horde. Dwarven spears mercilessly slaughtered the enemy in that moment. The three factions engaged in a fierce melee. Azog gave the order to release war beasts onto the battlefield. Thranduil immediately commanded his archers to assume their positions. At the same time, the dwarves sent destructive chariots into the battlefield, the wheels of which were extremely powerful and destroyed a large number of orcs at once. However, one of the chariots soon became the target of a concentrated attack by the behemoth. Realizing the impossibility of fighting on two fronts, General Azog promptly dispatched another unit to Rivertown, cutting off their retreat. If the dwarves failed, both elves and humans would have no way out. Bard immediately ordered the humans to fall back to Rivertown to protect their families, while the elves and dwarves fought desperately against the enemy. Giant beasts launched destructive assaults on the walls of Rivertown. Another behemoth quickly slammed into the walls, causing the thick walls to collapse with a thunderous roar. Ferocious orcs wasted no time in swarming in, and the defenseless inhabitants became helpless prey. A huge beast leaps out of the fence with a bang. Panicked residents begin to scatter and flee. While the orcs were still slaughtering, Bard rushed back to the town in the shortest possible time, organizing the surviving residents to resist the orcs while searching for his lost family. Humans and orc legions engaged in street battles. As Bard prepares to reunite with his family, a troll suddenly appears around the corner. Bard was deeply concerned for the safety of his child. Bard found a glimmer of hope in a nearby cart. The steep slope allowed the cart to quickly narrow the distance. The outer battles had become extremely unfavorable at this moment. Thranduil found himself under a targeted attack by the orcs. Dane's Iron Hills army suffered heavy casualties and was forced to fight and retreat. Azog took advantage of the situation to deploy a new type of behemoth onto the battlefield and crush the allied forces with an overwhelming attack. But Azog didn't give them a chance. He blew his horn again and signaled for another ferocious trolls for the final assault. Elves, orcs, and dwarves have reached the climax of the war. The Orc Legion holds a clear numerical advantage. When the allied forces concentrate their troops outside the city to confront the orcs, Azog sends another unit to attack Rivertown. The entire Rivertown is engulfed in flames, and the old, weak, women and children who had taken refuge in the city became lambs to the slaughter. Human leader Bard orders the civilians to take shelter in the town hall temporarily, while he and the remaining soldiers defend against the orcs, buying time for their escape. Once Rivertown was defeated, the human dwarves and elves, there is no way back. The Elven King, riding atop a elk, fights his way into Rivertown while retreating. Thranduil's mount thrust up 8 enemies at once. Just as Elk was unfortunately attacked by a bow and rolled to the ground, the orcs quickly surround Thranduil, launching a 4-sided assault. With a look of resentment, Thranduil stands up and takes up his twin swords to avenge his fallen elk. Thranduil's golden armored army also retreated to Rivertown. Outside the city, only Dane's Iron Hills army remains in a solitary struggle. The dwarves' forces have been greatly depleted by the relentless onslaught of the orcs. Dane can't understand why his cousin Thorin has not come to their aid. Rivertown has fallen completely, with heavy casualties suffered by both the elven golden armored troops and the humans. The dwarves had no other choice but to retreat to the foot of the lonely mountain for a brief period of rest and regrouping. Dane needs Thorin to rally the soldiers and boost their morale. However, Thorin remains indifferent, seated on the throne in the dwarven palace. Dwalin can no longer bear it and approaches Thorin, angrily berating him. Dwalin questions how Thorin can sit idly by while their kin bleed and sacrifice on the battlefield. Thorin, completely detached from their perspective, is only concerned with transferring all the gold from the palace to the mines. Dwalin informs Thorin that Dane's Iron Hills army is now surrounded by the enemy and on the verge of annihilation. If Thorin doesn't go out to support them soon, their people will be wiped out. Thorin asserts that sacrifices are inevitable in war, and the loss of those individuals is far less important than the treasure within the palace. How could the king of a nation say such inhumane things? Dwalin loses all faith in Thorin and sarcastically expresses his disappointment.
You sit here in these vast walls with a crown upon your head, and yet you are lesser now than you have ever been.
These words sting Thorin's greedy heart, and he begins to feel that his people are no longer loyal to him. Thorin tells Dwalin to leave before he kills him. The two men's conversation ended unhappily. Thorin walks alone down the golden corridor in a state of contemplation, the past reverberating in his mind. Thorin, hearing the scolding voice of his companion and his bad attitude of not sharing a single gold coin, the scenes of his grandfather attracting Smaug and bringing destruction upon their people are still vividly etched in his mind. The shadow of Smaug lingers, and Thorin feels as if the gold is consuming him. Thorin decided to take off his crown as heir to the throne of Turin. He did not want to be like his grandfather. Thorin Oakenshield, the name, woke him up. Meanwhile, the Iron Hills army is overwhelmed and cornered beneath the city walls, while Azog anticipates victory. Blowing the horn once more, Azog orders a final assault. Several dwarves on the city walls feel immense guilt for cowering inside the city and not joining the fight. Just then, Thorin picks up his sword and slowly approaches them. Kili can no longer hold back his anger and begins to berate Thorin.
I will not hide behind a wall of stone while others fight our battles for us! It is not in my blood, Thorin.
Thorin accepts Kili's reproach and acknowledges the truth in everyone's words. As the rightful heir of the Dwarven kingdom, Thorin will never back down from battle. The crowd seem to see the Thorin they knew before his back. Thorin walks before them, acknowledging that he no longer has the right to demand anything from them. He asks if they are willing to follow him one last time. With the dwarves pushed to the brink by the orcs, the situation seems dire. Suddenly, the clear sound of a bell shatters the silence of the lonely mountain. The gates of the city wall open, and Thorin leads 12 warriors, fiercely charging into the battlefield. Dane shouts at the top of his lungs, rallying his troops to fight for the king. With Thorin's participation, the dwarven army's morale soars. In a spiked formation, the determined dwarves cut through the orc army, despite their overwhelming numerical superiority. Though the orcs press heavily upon them, each dwarf displays unwavering courage on the battlefield.
The dwarves!
The rallying to the king.
The dwarves combine to knock down a trolls, which happened to trigger the switch of the stone thrower. Hardening the trolls fell to its death. Bombur, leveraging his size advantage, dispatches several orcs, though he requires assistance from his comrades after the fight, just as all the dwarves fought heroically against the orcs. Another trolls wielding a meteor hammer appeared on the battlefield and mercilessly slaughtered the dwarven warriors. Dwarves, caught off guard, are crushed into pieces. To counter trolls' overwhelming attacks, the dwarves collaborated to build a shield platform that allowed brave dwarves to jump onto trolls' backs and quickly defeat the controlling trolls. The dwarves used the chains to seize trolls' control, dealing a devastating blow to the surrounding orc soldiers and giving the dwarven warriors a moment's respite. Inside the city, Bard calls upon everyone to fight their way out of the siege, while the wizard Gandalf battles alongside the humans. Even the old, weak, and vulnerable individuals who had been hiding in the council chambers pick up weapons, willing to contribute their meager strength in the fight. With a loud cry, the townspeople pour out of the council chambers. Although lacking proper weapons, they bravely fought to the death against the orc soldiers with their farming tools. Amidst the chaos of the battle, Thorin encounters his cousin. Dane cannot understand why Thorin has only now appeared. Thorin doesn't offer much explanation but resolves their differences with a warm embrace. The balance of the situation still favors the orcs, and Dane hopes that Thorin has a plan to turn the tide. Thorin gazes towards Ravenhill in the distance, formulating a strategy in his mind. To defeat the Orc Legion, they must first defeat Azog on Ravenhill. Dane worries about Thorin risking his life, considering he is the king of the dwarves. Thorin said that it was because he was king that he had to take this action. Dane fears that Thorin will be intercepted by the orcs before reaching Ravenhill. Before Dane can finish his sentence, Philly and Kili arrive with a war chariot crafted by the dwarves.
Ravenhill! Go, mad bastards! Save you all.
Kili sharpened his blade on the wheel as he charged towards the enemy, while Thorin took the lead. riding a goat and quickly breaking through the orcs' interception. The dwarven chariots became orc reapers, with broken limbs flying in all directions wherever they went. Azog took notice and immediately ordered another wave of trolls to come forward and intercept it. Trolls wielding their hammers, they charged aggressively at the chariot. The dwarves controlling the chariot remained very calm during this crisis. They used the goat's jumping ability to quickly glide and leap to take out 6 trolls in one go. Just as the dwarves were still excited about their success, another armored troll suddenly attacked them. This war had been raging for over an hour in the original film and showed no signs of stopping. Thorin knew that in order to defeat the orcs' army, they had to first defeat Azog on Ravenhill. For the royal family of Turin, Thorin and dwarves build a chariot to break out and set off for Ravenhill. Sensing Thorin's intentions, Azog immediately ordered the trolls to intercept them. A troll in armor with a blade came barreling down on them. Dwarves who managed to escape forced into a frozen creek. In the rush, the dwarves took the opportunity to prepare the war chariots while the ferocious trolls relentlessly pursued them. With a roar, the trolls leaped into the river, relentlessly chasing after the dwarves. The ice behind them continued to crack and rupture. The dwarves' war chariots were on the verge of being overtaken by the pursuing enemy. Suddenly, a meteor hammer came hurtling towards the trolls. Another dwarf, riding a troll, rushed in to provide reinforcements. The 2 trolls engaged in a fierce battle amidst the icy river, just as the dwarves were cheering for their comrades in the rear. Another troll was carrying a wooden bridge to allow the ground forces to cross the river. The ice in front had already been damaged by the troll. The dwarves had to defeat the great orc in the shortest possible time. At the critical moment, the big half-orc fell unexpectedly and the dwarven chariot swiftly rushed over its body. Just out of danger, the wolves attack again. Before they have time to react, 2 of the running goats have been dragged away. 2 more wolves encircled them, launching a relentless assault. Only 3 of the war chariot's goats remained, and their speed had visibly diminished. A group of wolves from behind was closing in, step by step. In desperation, Balin decided to stay behind and hold off the enemy. He instructed the other 3 to cut the ropes and catch up with Thorin on the goats. Reluctantly, but with no other choice, the 3 successfully reached Ravenhill and reunited with Thorin. Upon Thorin's command, everyone began climbing up the mountain, utilizing the unique advantage of the goats. They quickly reached the mountainside. Several guards who came to intercept them were swiftly dispatched by Thorin. Meanwhile, the people of Rivertown encountered new troubles. The attacks of the troll made it impossible for them to resist. Fortunately, Gandalf arrived just in time to intervene and invoked a spell with his wizard staff. However, at a critical moment, the staff unexpectedly malfunctioned, but Troll's mallet won't give Gandalf time to study the staff. Without the power of the staff, Gandalf became as vulnerable as an ordinary person, having to dodge and continue attempting to fix it. As the troll let out a roar, Bofur, who was hiding behind a catapult, was startled. In the process, the coins concealed in his chest accidentally fell, triggering the release mechanism of the catapult. At this moment, Legolas, the elven prince, arrived with an elven maiden by his side. Legolas told Gandalf that another enemy army was creeping closer to the area, the Gundabad orc army led by Borg. Gandalf saw through Azog's entire plan. Borg took the opportunity to attack Ravenhill from the north, apparently targeting Thorin. Thranduil, realizing that his elven forces had suffered too many casualties, reconsidered his initial purpose of only seeking a necklace. Originally, this war had nothing to do with the elves. After fighting for so long, he almost forgot his own objective. Gandalf urged Thranduil to send his troops to Ravenhill to aid Thorin. Thranduil, however, stated that his army had shed enough blood and would no longer sacrifice for the dwarves. He decided to withdraw with his remaining forces. At this moment, Bilbo stepped forward and volunteered to go to Ravenhill to inform Thorin. He then discreetly put on the One Ring and set off while remaining invisible. Thorin, riding on a goat, fought his way to the mountaintop. Azog, standing on the command platform, revealed a sinister smile. The guards that came to meet the onslaught were no match for Thorin. After killing all the enemies, Thorin ran to the cliff's edge to gaze at the distant command platform, but to his surprise, Azog had vanished without a trace. Clearly this is Azog playing a trick. The icy lake surface appeared unnervingly calm, and the atmosphere of the conspiracy grew increasingly heavy. Thorin decided to have everyone split up and search, falling right into Azog's trap.
Shugul Shagari!
Go!
Urgazgumi!
Azog directly killed Philly in front of Thorin's eyes, Thorin with tears in her eyes and grief. Azog looking at Thorin with a provocative look. It's the same scene again, Thorin with anger and hatred in his eyes. Thorin had witnessed his grandfather's head being severed by Azog's hand, and now the death of his dear friend was vividly before him. This unholy grudge against Azog must be doubly repaid. Kili could no longer endure and was the first to charge forward. Thorin followed closely behind from the mountainside. Bilbo, unable to contain the turmoil in his heart as he looked at Philly's lifeless body, drew his sting sword. Bilbo sought revenge for his companions. Thorin quickly rushed to the top of the hill and confronted Azog. This had to end today. Thorin, with incredible fighting prowess unleashed by his fury, engaged in a fierce battle against Azog. They fought fiercely, with Thorin managing to knock off the shoulder armor on Azog's arm. However, Azog quickly turned the tide. Meanwhile, Bilbo, with a start, noticed a large group of bats swooping down from above him. Startled, Bilbo looked up just in time to see Bolg, leading the vanguard of the orcs' army, approaching. Meanwhile, Legolas and Tauriel also saw a large number of bats coming. Realizing that another contingent of the orcs' army had arrived, bats fly into battle and attack the dwarves' Iron Hills army, turning the tide in favor of the orcs. Another bat flew towards Legolas, but he quickly grabbed its leg. The bat became Legolas' best mode of transportation, carrying him to the top of Ravenhill. Tauriel saw her boyfriend fighting on the mountain and rushed to Ravenhill to assist Kili in battling the enemies. Legolas swiftly changed his position, flipping upside down and wielding his dual swords to charge at the enemy forces. He deftly killed a whole platoon of soldiers and, having found a favorable position, retrieved his sword, shot the bat with his bow and landed safely on high ground. At this point Thorin was in a bitter fight, fighting against Azog while also fending off the attacking orcs. Seeing the overwhelming number of orcs approaching Thorin, Legolas provided remote support with his bow and arrows from a high vantage point. With cover Thorin he took up his dagger again and rushed towards the enemy. Tauriel, anxiously worried about Kili's safety and her shout, caught Bolg's attention, drawing him towards her. Tauriel was clearly no match for Bolg in single combat, and even Legolas could only fight him to a standstill. Soon, Bolg grabbed Tauriel and lifted her into the air. The shouting got Kili's attention. Tauriel fighting his way out of Bolg's chokehold. A furious Bolg throws him off the ground and hits the rocks. Tauriel, badly wounded, too weak to fight back. Just as Bolg was about to deliver the final blow to Tauriel, Kili descended from the sky, landing on top of Bolg, finally taking his turn to protect Tauriel. However, using brute force against Bolg proved to be futile effort. Tauriel fought to stop Bolg but was thrown off the edge of the cliff. Bolg stabbed Kili in the chest, and Tauriel, filled with despair, tearfully watched her beloved die before her eyes. Kili did not expect to see Tauriel again. This would be the last goodbye with regret. He closed his eyes forever. Kili's presence and contributions were invaluable throughout the journey, and it was a great loss that he perished. Without Kili's help, Thorin wouldn't have been able to reclaim the lonely mountain. When Thorin was consumed by greed, it was Kili who was the first to stand up and criticize Thorin's mistakes. When Thorin decided to attack Ravenhill, Kili fearlessly chose to join Thorin in the fight against the enemies. Such bravery displayed by Kili was highly esteemed within the ranks of the dwarves. Tauriel couldn't accept the reality and her eyes reflected anger. If she could not defeat him, she decided to die with Porg to avenge Kili. Suddenly, Legolas sensed the trembling of the stone tower. Looking down, he saw a troll frantically dismantling the tower beneath him. Legolas after Legolas came back to his senses saw Bolg and Tauriel rolling down the cliff. Tauriel, hanging from the edge of the steps, is in critical condition, while Bolg slowly approached her. Legolas wanted to kill Bolg with a single arrow. Unfortunately, his bow ran out of arrows at the critical moment. Bolg was closing in on Tauriel. Legolas with a bold idea. Legolas took his sword, leapt down and stabbed the great orc through the head. The pained troll crashed into the stone tower, causing it to collapse, forming a bridge on the other side of the cliff. Legolas engaged in a thrilling final battle with Bolg on the bridge. This is the most spectacular solo battle of the Elven Prince and the Hobbit. The enemy that came face to face was the orcs. Commander Borg, who who was no less powerful than Legolas. They had a fierce battle in Esgaroth before. In the end, Bolg fled the battlefield using the excuse of tracking the dwarves. It seems that today they must engage in a decisive battle on this bridge. Legolas, using his elven sword, was only able to block a few moves before being struck down by Bolg's club and falling to a lower level. The stone tower, heavily impacted, became extremely unstable. Bolg took advantage of this and continued to smash the bridge. Legolas found himself in a highly disadvantageous position, having to both fight and retreat. Meanwhile, Thorin was also under attack by the orcs on the upper level. Suddenly, a heavy hammer knocked Thorin down onto the icy lake. Thorin saw Legolas being beaten helplessly down there. Quickly taking out the enemy in front of him and throwing him off the bridge turned the tide for Legolas. However, Thorin was unarmed and in great danger. Seeing the orcs about to attack Thorin, Legolas, without hesitation, handed his elven sword back to Thorin, because the sword originally belonged to Thorin. Seizing the opportunity, Bolg attempted to ambush Legolas from behind, but Legolas evaded in time and stabbed Bolg's hand with his dual-bladed knife. However, Bolg didn't care and didn't even feel the pain. He treated the embedded knife as part of his body, to avoid a fatal blow. Legolas intentionally fell to the lower level. Bolg used a massive stone to crush the stone tower, causing the bridge to rapidly collapse. Legolas, utilizing the agility of the elves, swiftly stepped on the floating stones with nimble footwork to ascend and performed a spinning scissor kick, knocking Bolg down. Both were on the brink of falling off the cliff. As they exchanged blows again, Legolas sent a blow at Bolg, but it was blocked. Bolg smirked provocatively at Legolas, and Legolas responded with a smile of his own. Legolas, using nearby stones, planted his feet on Bolg's shoulder, then drove his sword into Bolg's head. Bolg's eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. At the moment the bridge collapsed, Legolas leapt backwards to the edge of the cliff. Bolg and the stone bridge plummeted down the cliff. It was at this point that Thorin finally met Azog. With a resentful gaze, Thorin looked at Azog. This feud must be settled today with Azog. With a sword in hand, Thorin strode forward with determined steps to challenge Azog. Azog, undeterred, as he had a horde of orcs arriving on the battlefield behind him, wore a smirk of certain victory. Azog attacked Thorin mercilessly with his stone hammer. Thorin can only avoid it. In terms of strength, Thorin was no match for Azog. Even if Legolas joins the fight, they still have no chance of winning. The blows of the stone hammer caused the ice on the lake to crack. Thorin realized that relying on brute force wouldn't work against Azog, but in terms of wit, Thorin had the upper hand over Azog. Thorin sought to use the cracking ice to turn the tide. Soon, the standing ice detached from the ice surface and began swaying on the water. Thorin slid onto the ice, relying on constant dodging to find a counterattack. The moment Azog swung his stone hammer down, Thorin quickly rose and swung his greatsword at Azog's abdomen. However, Azog's armor was incredibly strong and did not suffer under such an attack. Instead, he provoked Azog. The hammer slammed into Thorin. The stone hammer hit the ice and could not be pulled back. Just as the two looked at each other, behind Thorin flew a flock of giant eagles. Gandalf led the eagles to the battlefield for reinforcement. The legions of orcs on the battlefield were attacked by the eagles as if they were molehills. Accompanying them was Beorn, the skin changer. Beorn somersaulted from the sky and transformed into a massive flying bear as he descended to the ground. The tide of the battle shifted in favor of the humans. Thorin, seizing the opportunity, discarded his sword, threw a stone hammer at Azog before he could react. With a glance at Azog, Thorin leaped onto the ice. The ice layer quickly tilted in Azog's direction. Despite his struggles, Azog ultimately sank into the depths of the lake. Thorin had succeeded, and he finally let out a sigh of relief. The black bear and the giant eagles became an overwhelming force on the battlefield. Orcs' legions simply cannot resist the attack. It seemed that victory was within the grasp of the humans. However, at that moment, Thorin noticed that Azog's body hadn't sunk to the lake's bottom. Azog keeps floating on the water with his blue eyes open. Thorin keep following Azog's body direction. Thorin wants to see Azog die with his own eyes. Azog broke the ice and pinned Thorin directly pinned underneath. This move made it difficult for Thorin to counterattack. In this critical moment, Thorin seemed to have a realization. If he could kill Azog, it would bring peace to Middle-earth. Thorin made a decisive choice to abandon resistance and sacrifice himself for the sake of taking Azog's life. Thorin finally made it this time, and with his last breath he made it to the edge of the cliff to look over the battlefield. Thorin saw that the Iron Mountain Legion was on the verge of victory. Thorin lies on the ground and breathes a final sigh of relief. Thorin on his deathbed to Bilbo confessions. Thorin asked Bilbo to forgive him before his death. Thorin wanted to retract the words he had said to Bilbo on the city walls.
Your claim. Do not speak to me.
Throw him from the rampart!
He felt guilty for involving Bilbo in these dangers. Bilbo assured him that he never regretted joining the journey with everyone, and the gains they achieved were the greatest honor for the Baggins family. Some people say that even with Thorin's sacrifice, he is not worthy of forgiveness, but I don't agree. Although Thorin was blinded by greed, he ultimately came to his senses. Furthermore, when facing immense wealth, it's difficult for anyone to resist. Moreover, Thorin overcame his greed at a critical moment, relinquishing the vast fortune and leading his brothers to kill the enemy together. Thorin was the first to bravely charge up Ravenhill. He used his life as the price for the future of the dwarves. So, when facing Azog, Thorin had already cast aside his life. This war was not a battle of 5 armies sparked by Thorin's feud with the elves. It was orchestrated by Azog's orc army with premeditation. Thorin spoke his final words to Bilbo.
Farewell, Master Burglar. Plant your trees. If more people valued home.
And with regret, he closed his eyes forever. After reclaiming the Lonely Mountain, Thorin ultimately couldn't sit on the throne of the Dwarven Kingdom. Bilbo lost his dearest friend, and Tauriel lost the man she loved deeply. Legolas, witnessing his beloved woman grieving for someone else, also felt a great sorrow in his heart. Legolas informed his father that he would be leaving for a while. Thranduil didn't dissuade him. Before leaving, Thranduil instructed Legolas to go north to meet someone. Legolas asked for the person's name, but Thranduil didn't directly answer, only saying that others called him the Ranger. In Rivertown, humans sounded the victory horn. However, there was no jubilation despite the victory. Although they won the battle, they also lost many lives. Peace was attained at the cost of countless bloodshed. With heavy hearts, people prayed on the city walls for the fallen warriors. Thorin, Kili, and Fili's bodies were brought back to the castle. The Arkenstone was buried alongside Thorin's remains. This was to prevent future generations from being tempted by the Arkenstone. Thorin had no descendants to inherit his throne. His cousin Dane from the Iron Hills took over as the ruler.
Long live the king!
Long live the king!
The following day, Bilbo chose not to participate in the victory celebrations and decided to return to the Shire. The dwarves who had accompanied him throughout the journey bid him farewell at the doorstep. After saying goodbye to his comrades, Bilbo embarked on the journey back home with Gandalf by his side. Gandalf escorted Bilbo all the way to the borders of the Shire. During their farewell, Gandalf reminded Bilbo not to use the One Ring lightly. It turned out that Gandalf had known about the ring all along but had not revealed Bilbo's little secret during their travels. But Gandalf had no idea that this One Ring was the ultimate One Ring. Bilbo told Gandalf a well-intentioned lie.
You needn't worry about that ring. It fell out of my pocket during the battle. I lost it.
You're a very fine person, Mr. Baggins.
Gandalf, who had no interest in the One Ring, didn't care either. This led to the Lord of the Rings trilogy of stories. Bilbo finally returned to his homeland, Bag End. He was surprised to see his neighbors moving his belongings. It turned out that Bilbo had been declared dead, and his belongings were being auctioned off on the spot. The auctioneer asked Bilbo to provide evidence to prove his identity. Bilbo took out the contract of his adventure, bearing his signature as Bilbo Baggins, from his pocket.
Who is this person you pledged your service to? Thorin Oakenshield.
He was my friend.
As Bilbo entered his home, it was in disarray. He seemed to reminisce about the first encounter with the dwarves at Bag End. The experience of this adventure had taught Bilbo to cherish everything before him even more. However, the greatest treasure Bilbo acquired was still the One Ring tucked away in his pocket. 60 years passed in the blink of an eye, and Bilbo reached the age of 111. His old friend Gandalf traveled a great distance to celebrate Bilbo's birthday. This is just about where the Lord of the Rings begins. Let me know in the comments section if you want to read more of the Lord of the Rings. I also love this fascinating world of Middle-earth. That's why I didn't even want to skip a minute of this series.